Well, we're so happy today to be doing Shang-Chi and Legend of the Ten Rings. What I really found special about the movie was it was a world the Marvel audience had never seen before. So we thank you so much for joining us on our virtual Poly Theater stage.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so just in case the Q&A questions are not good, we have the karaoke machine ready to go to play Hotel California to confuse the audience.
That'll be great, as long as I'm not singing.
They actually sung pretty poorly in the movie too, so I think we'll be able to emulate the movie.
Yeah, we had to tell them not to sound too professional because they should be playing real people. So,
well, they definitely nailed that. All right, so we're gonna go back to the beginning of this. Shang-Chi has appeared in so many different comic books, crossovers. The history of the Marvel. While sifting through all that source material, how did you land on the version of the story that you wanted to tell?
it was actually before I got this job. I was looking through the source material and just looking for something that I could connect to, not only personally, but also as an Asian American. I was just looking for the core of something in the comics that grabbed me. And the theme of the father and son, and a dad who raised his son to be a killer, and having that son grow up and turn into something that I don't think the dad really wanted him to be, and having that be the core of our conflict, I think was something that I really connected with. And that was the heart of the story that I pitched to Marvel. It actually was kind of going a bit away from the comics, because what my exploration was not just a father and son who are enemies, but a father and son who are broken by something, and that their relationship was shattered. And to create a story that, even though technically in our movie they are enemies, but not to forget that there is deep love, even though it's skewed and warped, that there is deep love still between them throughout. And that was kind of the heart of the story that I initially pitched to Marvel.
So one of the things that stood out to me, because I have a lot of friends that are huge Marvel fans, and of course some that don't know the universe that well, and they always have a hard time. They always tell me they have a hard time following the stories because I don't know the Marvel. But in this one, it seemed it was very accessible to Marvel fans and non-Marvel. Did you approach on the script making sure that you would be able to reach both audiences, and even the ones that are not used to the Marvel universe?
Yeah, I am one of those people that often get lost in a Marvel movie. So and I have a very, very simple kind of weird mantra that I've stuck to since I was making short films when I was like 11 years old with my siblings. At that point, the only audience member that I was ever making something for was my mom. She was the only one that wasn't in our short films, and we would force her to sit and watch them. And so that's who I was always trying to please. So even though like my mom's very conservative, never watches anything with a cuss word in it. So even short term 12 is like a lot for her, because there's a lot of F-bombs and throughout. But my goal is always to make a movie that I will relate to, that my friends will relate to, but my mom will also relate to. And I've so far I've been successful, and this movie was I also had that mantra in my mind for this, and my mom's never seen any of the other Marvel movies, so I wanted to make sure that she would also be able to get something from the experience.
Let's talk a little about, like, especially in the early drafts, crafting the villain. what I like, he wasn't the let's wipe out the world villain and this arbitrary take over the world. He had a very complex backstory. And I was struck by juxtaposing his love and warmth with his family, but his also brutality. How did you go about when you were writing the script, trying to show the good and the bad in him emerge as one thing without being so black and white?
It was probably the biggest challenge of this movie was that we knew that we had to have a villain named the Mandarin that had been alluded to in previous Marvel films. We also knew that that character carries a lot of baggage in terms of being a pretty stereotypical, mustache twirling Fu Manchu type of a portrayal of an Asian trope, and we knew that we had to figure out how to shatter that and to make a character that was not contributing to that type of stereotype. We also knew that we had to create a character that would be, complex enough that an actor like Tony Leung might consider it. And so we stopped thinking of this character as the Mandarin. We gave him an actual name, Wenwu. We gave him a real backstory. We started to think of him as a human, and I started to see him really as a man who is battling himself throughout the movie, who is battling his own insecurities, his own need and craving for love and for acceptance. Tony Leung actually said this about halfway through the movie. He said he told me that Wenwu is a man who does not, deep down, he does not think that he deserves to be loved. And a byproduct of that is that even though he deeply loves his own children, he has no idea how to do that correctly. And I thought that was a pretty insightful way to look at that character.
One of the other things that we touched on a little before is grief, which I found fascinating, how grief and trauma affected each character differently. I mean, the sister was abandoned. Shang-Chi ran away, he runs away and, almost denies who he is. The father goes into bitterish revenge and denial. How did you approach exploring the theme of grief in different ways through all your characters?
There's 6 kids in my family, and it is one of the over and over when there is a big event in all of our lives that affects us emotionally one way or another, we all respond to it very differently. And I thought this was also the core of the story that I initially pitched to Marvel, was the story of a family that was broken by a very traumatic event, and that the core beating heart of that family was gone. And what do each of these characters do in reaction to that? And starting the movie in a place where they are all scattered, both emotionally and physically distanced from each other. And over the course of the movie, watching circumstance and partially Dad's combination of love and psychosis bring everybody back together and be forced to not only reckon with who they are individually, but also who they are in the context of their family.
I think this is one of the reasons that this film is be able to relate to so many audiences, because like you said, we all, people, siblings, and know the pain of losing a parent or something like that. So this is very relatable, even though it's in a fantastical world.
I'm glad you think so.
You have several women characters who are all empowered in their own different ways, but all have a strong influence in Sean's life. How did you approach structuring the screenplay so that the female characters shape your overall story, which is Sean's story too, but at the same time had their own individual journeys and arcs?
It, it doesn't. I mean, the same is true in every movie that I've made. Like whenever there are clear arcs for characters that are not the main character, typically those are happening in draft 2, 3, 4, 5. You know, you're usually my first draft, those characters are like, damn, I got to figure out something for them because they're just kind of there in act 1 and I don't know what they're there for the rest of the movie. But if you are, you know, dedicated to all of your characters and giving them a reason to be in your movie, eventually something, you know, a light bulb goes on. And it was important for us from the very beginning. The idea was to surround Shang-Chi with female characters who were all not only integral in his growth, but are all individually on their own journeys as well. And it is, you know, potentially an out, you know, it comes from my own upbringing with being around 3 sisters and my mom being such a big influence on me, my grandma being one of the biggest creative influences on me. Dave Callahan, my co-screenwriter, is also just always around female friends, very platonic female friends who are very, very close to him and played a big part in his life. So we're tapping into a lot of that in the writing process.
Yeah, I kind of like, and some of my actually women students in you know in my class mentioned that they liked how the women were not seen through the lens of a male gaze as a director. They were also not rivals of each other, so I felt they were kind of rich in things that we haven't really seen before on the screen.
That's I'm glad. That makes me very happy because I love all those characters so much and definitely didn't want them to fall into any kind of cliche.
All right, let's talk some casting. What did you see in Simu that made you think he could play the dramatic, comedic, as well as the physically demanding parts of the character?
Simu was, I mean, we saw a lot of people for this role, and we were, I mean, for me, the number one thing that we wanted for Shang-Chi was relatability. We wanted somebody who was of, I mean, ideally somebody who was of Chinese descent, and but also felt very American and would surprise you, regardless of what your ethnicity is, would surprise you with how American he is. That was really, I mean, the truth is, at the time, I don't think there's any other actor on the planet who could play this role. Simu Liu was, you know, he grew up in China. He speaks perfect Mandarin, and he is incredibly westernized. Like he is, I mean, he's from Canada, but you know, he is like an American jock. Like he just, you know, he's obsessed with basketball and sports and video games, and he's like he's a dude. He also contains this. He has something about him that I think is actually very difficult to replicate on screen, and only certain actors have it. And it is this ability to just feel very at ease and relatable, and feel like, oh, that could be my friend. And that's really what we wanted for this character. And in the comics, Shang-Chi was, you know, modeled after Bruce Lee in a sense, and was this dude who was typically walking around without a shirt on and a red headband, even if he was in Times Square. and he was always like the clear outsider of American society, and we just felt like we've seen that before. I personally, as an Asian American, haven't seen really many films that have portrayed the culture that I grew up in or that my friends operate in. And it was very exciting for me to have a cast like Simu and Aquafina to paint that portrait of that American, Asian American kind of experience that I really haven't seen before.
And also, we need an actor to go up who could go toe to toe with the legendary actor Tony Leung. So you need someone who could, stand up. I wouldn't ask you why did you cast him, because he's awesome. But what did Tony like? What did he bring to your character that really kind of surprised you or special? What did Tony bring to the dad that really was special?
I mean, I never thought that we would ever, in a million years, get Tony Leung to be in this movie. He wasn't doing any Western movies at the time that I just went out on a whim and tried to contact him. There isn't like a clear way to get to Tony. Marvel doesn't really mean much to him. The truth is, like, we somehow got to him, and he knew that we were interested in him doing the role, and he agreed to have a meeting with me, a Zoom meeting like this. I later just discovered that he told me that he took that meeting, but he was going to tell me that he wasn't going to do the project. Like, he had already made up his mind that he wasn't going to do it. And it's probably good I didn't know that, but I got on the call with him, and I wasn't trying to pitch him or convince him. But I don't know, we just started talking about the character. We started talking about family. We started talking about our own families, our own relationships with our parents. And it was just a really wonderful conversation. And from my standpoint, I was like, I mean, Tony Leung might never do this movie, but I'm having a great conversation with Tony Leung, so I'm stoked. And when we got off the call, I had no idea if he would do it or not, but there was something about that conversation that made him decide to do it, because within a week he was signed on. So,
well, I mean, it's a great part. I mean, he gets to play, family warmth and like the great, but multiple sides of the character, a brutal side in one second. I mean, it's a great part for an actor to sink his teeth into.
Yeah, and I really do think that if there's anybody that is going to really shatter this stereotype of the evil baddie Asian man, Tony is the perfect person to do that. And like I said, it was to me very revelatory when he expressed where this was coming from, how he was playing Wenwu as a man who was really desperately trying to figure love out and just could not figure it out because he was just constantly getting in the way of himself.
Now, you mentioned Aquafina. I mean, we've seen her before. She's very funny, but also very dramatic. I was struck by her dramatic skills, actually, in this movie, especially. What led you to cast Aquafina?
Aquafina was our first casting choice that we made. We knew that we wanted Shang-Chi to have an Asian American best friend, who would become the surrogate sister, and her family would kind of become the surrogate family that he has escaped into. And she, Aquafina was the first person to come to our mind. and I met her in a little coffee shop in LA, and we just hit it off, and I love her to death.
Now, I mean, the sister character, you have a real character abandoned by her brother. It felt like a very real sibling relationship between me. You know, she did set up an underground fight club, which is awesome. This was her first role, like her first film credit. What did you see in her in that situation to cast somebody who actually had not acted before?
Sarah Finn, our casting director, who does all the casting for Marvel, she did a lot of searching all through China for this role, because we wanted something specific for the Xiaoling character. We wanted an actor out of mainland China, whose primary language was Mandarin, but who could also speak English. But we really wanted to have these two characters, the Shang-Chi character who moved to America and has become very Americanized, to be we wanted that culture clash to be naturally woven into our actor, which we found with Simu. And when it came to Xiaoling, we wanted to find somebody who really represented the current youth culture experience of somebody living in modern China, living in a city like Shanghai or Beijing. And Meng'er, we found her. She was living in Shanghai, and she was doing musical theater there. She's if you ever have a chance to hear her sing, she'll like blow your mind. The voice that comes out of that small frame is pretty insane. But her audition was just very free and unexpected and sassy, and she just didn't really she wasn't trying to prove anything. She was just like a very free spirit, and it was a very special audition that she didn't even know what she was auditioning for when she sent it in. She just did a tape at home and sent it, and next thing when she knew, we were flying her out to Sydney to come and do a screen test with Simu.
It's probably good that she didn't know it was a Marvel movie, because that might have stressed her out.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to ask you about Michelle Yeoh. So, this is kind of a fan question because I love her, Michelle. What was your reaction when she said yes?
I mean, I also love Michelle Yeoh. She's a goddess. It's the same reaction I had when Tony signed on. Like the fact that we have Tony Leung and Michelle Yeoh and Sir Ben Kingsley all in one movie was just, I felt like I was getting a front row ticket to like the best show in town. And these actors were very intimidating for me to initially. When I first met each of them, I was so awestruck and intimidated. But what I found very quickly was how gracious they are, how curious they are, and that kind of the power of their performances that we see on screen is actually a result of a very open, childlike, ego-less personality that all of these actors possess, even though truthfully they have every right to be very narcissistic and full of themselves, but they really aren't. They're the most hardworking. They worked way harder than the younger generation of actors. I mean, they would all. I think everyone would admit the work ethic in these actors is like very clearly the reason why they have gotten to the place that they've gotten.
So now we're getting some scenes. You start the movie in Mandarin, which is a very interesting way to start, especially a Marvel movie I've seen before. How important was you introduce, the family backstory, the culture in your opening scene, especially with the mother and father scene?
When it came to what language each character should be speaking in this movie, there wasn't. It was very practical. We just asked ourselves. I mean, these are all bilingual. In the case of Wen Wu, the idea is that he's multilingual, like he could speak anything. So our question in every scene was just what would they be speaking in these scenes? Is there a reason for them to be speaking English, or would they be speaking in Chinese? In the opening of the movie, there was really no logical reason why anybody would be speaking English at that moment. So we left it all in Chinese. We weren't sure if the studio or if the audiences were going to like that. But when we started doing our test screenings, from the very beginning, we were asking what people think about watching subtitles for the first 12 minutes of the movie. And it was, oddly, it was always responded to in a positive way. Which was surprising in a really great way. I think people just felt like they were taken into a world that they weren't expecting pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, we have to talk a little bit about your working with your cinematographer. I mean, if we just start the opening, the romance fight scene was wonderful. It looked beautiful. How did you, work with your cinematographer to create kind of the overall look of the film, and especially the way the characters interact in the space?
Bill Pope is he's an incredibly thoughtful artist, and he he would, we'll just go through the script. We'd go through the script and talk about emotions and talk about uh, how things should feel. We would talk about certain references, and the general aesthetic that we wanted was really to start the beginning of the movie to feel like um, to feel like a story was being told, to feel a little fantastical in the first 12 minutes of the movie. But once we land ourselves, I don't know if it's 12 minutes, but whenever we land in San Francisco, that it would suddenly feel more grounded, and that we would find our footing with Shang-Chi and Katie in San Francisco in a way that did not feel like the Marvel version of San Francisco or the Marvel version of the Asian American experience. We actually wanted it to feel much more realistic there. And as Shang-Chi gets pulled further and further into this journey, we knew that we had to ultimately get to an aesthetic that would allow for a giant demon monster to crash through a gate and have a huge creature on creature fight. So as we progress through the story and go, cross dimensions into Ta Lo, that the aesthetic would, dial a little closer into the fantastical.
Just a little about the grounding, especially early. I was really struck. I love the scene where you mentioned like Sean's kind of been adopted by Aquafina's family. I
Yeah.
love the moments of, like the culture, Katie kind of getting with her mom, like, "Hey, mom, you're American," but then also the differences of where later we see during the dinner scene with the dad questioning, like, "Don't forget your Chinese name." How important for you there to kind of show the different like Asian American culture? Sean was being bullied, not fully accepted in both worlds. How important for you to cover all that, showing the cultural experience, you know, in both
I
sides?
mean, in a lot of ways, that was the most important thing. We wanted these characters to be very reflective of our own experience, and the experience of our friends. and so all of those, the scene with the family, truthfully, if you think of it just pure plot wise, you could just cut that entire scene with the family and you wouldn't lose anything plot wise. But I think you would lose quite a bit character wise, and you would lose a lot of the relatability that I think, whether you're Asian American or not, that scene is so full of cultural references that it gives you kind of the anchor for who these characters are and where they're coming from.
Now, Sean and Kay's relationship, it was refreshing to have a genuine friendship. You mentioned almost sibling, instead of being pushed into being a romance. How did you want to set that up early, especially when you take the valet scene, which was hysterical, but making sure their relationship seemed a little more friendship, sibling, not, just the typical, let's get them married or something.
It was a balance that we had to keep trying to find. If you have too many looks between two characters, even if you think that they're friends, all of a sudden the audience is like, wait, what are they secretly, are you telling me they're having sex on the side? There's just and we found that balance through testing the movie and getting audiences reactions to that relationship, and fine-tuning it to the place where we ended up.
All right, so obviously your film has some martial arts. What was the training process like for the cast?
It was pretty intense. Simu had it the worst. He was the first to sign on, and basically as soon as we were in soft prep, still in LA, he started training. He's a pretty physical person, which was very helpful, but he did not have martial arts experience. So he went through quite a transformation from September through, we started shooting the beginning of February. So his training was pretty intense throughout that time. Meng'er as well. She'd never done any kind of fighting at all. So as soon as she showed up in Sydney, she also joined that training. I promised them that I would also join the training along with them and just go through it with them. And I unfortunately didn't even show up one day. So I really broke that promise. They got really in shape, and I just got more and more out of shape as the days went by.
Well, I haven't ridden the bus in a few years, and I only vaguely remember fights breaking out like that in my younger days. I love the natural setting of the bus. Instead of, it felt like a real space where characters would actually, this could happen. What were the challenges of shooting the bus sequence, which obviously was your first big fight sequence?
There's tons of challenges for that bus sequence. The biggest challenge is you can't just go to San Francisco and shoot that kind of stuff live. So we shipped 3 of those giant accordion buses out to Sydney. We threw them on barges and shipped them out to Sydney. And then we put them on a stage in Sydney. One was up on a gimbal that was about 25 feet in the air and was able to take the bus at a 45-degree angle to level, and was also able to twist and shimmy this way and that way. So you could kind of, from the interior of the bus, you could kind of do every motion that we needed it to do as it went down the hill. We had a second bus that was flat on the ground, but would be able to shake and rattle. So depending on the stunts we're doing, and depending on where the bus was in its trajectory down the hills of San Francisco, we would decide which bus to shoot on. The other challenge was just mapping out and coordinating at what point in the fights the bus was at a certain point on its run that we had created. and it's definitely a bit of a fictional run because you can't really constantly go downhill anywhere in San Francisco for more than maybe a minute. And our sequence is going downhill for about 5 minutes. So we created kind of a fictional run that we mapped out beforehand when we scouted in San Francisco, and then we shot all the interior, and then after that we went and got plates in San Francisco to match where they should be on the interior. We got those plates, and then we shot all the exterior big car crashes and bus crashes.
Well, I like it. I mean, I love obviously the fight scene between the brother and sister was a great intro for the sister character, the bamboo locations. But I was really struck by how you seem to always slow down the action to focus, not just a fight, to focus on the character.
Mm.
So that's something we like. We just don't want to have a crazy martial art. We want to be actually grounded in something about the character. Was that something you were thinking about in those kind of sequences?
I mean, I actually tune out when action is just action. I think the reason I love, and I think the reason most people love Jackie Chan movies isn't because the martial arts is amazing. I mean, it is amazing and the stunts are amazing, but what really keeps you engaged is him. It's his human moments of getting hurt, of going of like of him getting his butt kicked in the middle of kicking butt. That's the human part that keeps you engaged in the fight. And for this movie, it was really important to make sure that every action sequence was doing something to our characters. Was you're either watching a relationship build or break apart. Some action sequences are literally the physical representation of a verbal argument that they would probably having if this was a drama. And so that's kind of the place that we started at with every fight sequence in this movie was, what are the character moments? And then it was very important to figure out where in the fight we were going to tell those character moments, whether it's through little dialogue beats, like when brother and sister have it out on the scaffolding just really briefly, when Shang-Chi says, "You left us for dead," and Xiaoling says, "Now you know how it feels." Like, just in 2 lines, you kind of know what they're, and then the fight continues. But a lot of times it's just through looks, through 2 characters. When you have an actor like Tony Leung and Fala together, all you really need are 2 looks to tell you exactly what they're thinking.
Now, obviously, the mother is the heart, the heart of the family, and you had a lot of flashbacks showing them, and I was struck, like the decision to let her. We don't see her die, but we see Sean's eyes watching. What was your process of thinking about how you want to weave in the mother flashbacks to kind of, as a heartbeat of your story?
I mean, mom dying was definitely that was also something that we found in the edit room. It was sadly, we were editing it right around the time that a lot of this violence was happening, and the murder of some Asian females, and it didn't. We had shots of her, not necessarily being killed, but we had more in your face things that might have been a little more dramatic, but it just didn't feel right. And playing those scenes just purely from Shang-Chi's perspective was always much more impactful and emotional, and making you imagine what actually happened?
It was interesting. Like after we watched the movie together, I mentioned in our virtual green room on Tuesday, and we have a theater, and we got to watch it. And most of the students had never seen it on the big screen, only on their laptop, so they were excited. But it seems like when I said, "What was your scene that was most impactful to you?" They all kind of hovered around the same scene, the dinner scene, when the father questions Aquafina about, don't what is your Chinese real name, and how he's trying to regain his name, stuff like that. What was your thought process? Why do you think the scene is resonating so well? Because it was a lot going on, I think, character wise, but
Wow. I mean, I've honestly never heard anybody reference that as one of their most impactful scenes. That's cool. Um, I mean, I also really like that. I really like that scene. I find it, it's the first time in the movie that you start to see that Wenwu is not what you think he is. Um, I think you start to realize that he's much more human than I think you expect. Um, and the I it's also the first time that we're seeing there's a lot of uh, emotional tension that's bubbling in that scene. It's the first time that this family is all sitting together since mom died. It doesn't. I mean, I've always connected to that scene. It makes me happy that other people are too.
now I love the script, but I do have one question that leaves really unresolved for me, and I can't, it's basically what Ben Kingsley asked. I'm going to ask you, how
Yes,
did the director of Planet of the Apes get those apes to ride horses?
that's that is a really good question. I have no idea. That's movie magic.
You mentioned Ben Kingsley earlier. I mean, how? I mean, I mean, I've grown up with him, watched him. He's a wonderful actor. Just his comedic timing was amazing. How was it for you guys to see that side of him, getting to direct that side of him? Because he's hysterical in the movie.
Yeah, he's it's funny because he takes comedy very seriously, and that doesn't mean that he's, I mean, he's having a blast. But he doesn't just show up and just start like improvising. He I mean, the like he asks so many questions about the character, and I have to be on it when I go into his trailer before we start, because he has so many thoughtful questions, so many ideas, and we kind of just go through the script and that we're going to shoot that day. And it was actually a huge learning experience to work with somebody at that level and to see how many angles he looks at a character from, even if he's playing, the fool of our movie. He really wants to play that fool from a place of depth, and doesn't want Trevor to come across as just a shtick. And so, and you see it in his performance. Like, he's not really phoning anything in, which was such a pleasant surprise to me, because there's a part of me that thinks, oh, this is a Marvel movie, so this is like Sir Ben's payday, and he doesn't really give a this. He's just going to come in and like get his paycheck, but he really cares. All these, like Tony Leung really cares, and Michelle Yeoh as well. Like it was so inspiring to me to see them come on to the set and take it so seriously, and while still having a lot of fun. So that part was very great.
One of the other scenes, I mentioned the scenes where I was, hey, students, I always like asking, what was your favorite scene or most scene? And one of the other scenes that came up is when Sean learns to fight through her aunt. the way her mother, like get to taught the mother's ways.
Yeah.
And that fight is more with patience and grace, where his father taught him brutality. Uh, how did you see that sequence as a way, to reveal Sean how it would become one inside him?
I'm very happy that people like that scene. It was our one of our great choreographers, Peng Zhang, who's from mainland China. He he's also a wushu champion himself. He choreographed that. It actually was very lately choreographed because we were working on so many things that one just kind of, we weren't able to get to it really until about 4 days before we were going to start shooting. So Peng, who is really incredible, took those 4 days. I mean, he was also doing a lot of other stuff, but he'd come in after work and start figuring out what the choreo would be. And we knew that it was supposed to be playful. We knew that this was this is an aunt basically teaching her son how to let go of his hate. And it's not like, I would argue that it's not even hate against his dad, it's a hate against himself. And it really was a very simple lesson that comes down to that moment when he's doing this and she just does that. And they start to dance together. It actually, sometimes the timing and the pressure of a schedule does some magic. And in this case, because we had to rush and because we had to create this choreo so quickly, I think something kind of there was a naturalism that kind of bubbled up into it, and it was a bit more exciting and off the cuff, and that playfulness that you see between Shang-Chi and his aunt really came out.
Well, and it was nice because I think without him learning that his mother's art, we wouldn't have been able to buy Dad at the end of the movie sacrificing himself for his son when he saw that he had that. Do you feel that was kind of important for you because you had to earn the end with the dad sacrificing himself? Do you think that kind of helped you reach that point?
Yeah, I mean, I think I see Shang-Chi's journey as really a journey of self-therapy. And step one is that moment that he has with his aunt, and really at the end of that, he doesn't quite learn a full lesson by the end of that. He's just posed with a question and told, given a nugget to think about. And really it's just like, stop hiding, stop running. And for the first time, he sits down and tells his best friend what actually happened. I think that was step 2 of his self-therapy. And he's still not quite there, because now he's going to kill his dad. I think part of step 3 is like getting to the point where he could kill his dad. He's just finally unleashing all the emotions that he's been just kind of bottling up. And then he finds healing with the memory of his mom and with his involvement in her death at the bottom of the sea. Then he finds some healing with his dad, and then finally he finds healing with his sister, when he finally ultimately decides not to leave her at a moment that he arguably should have. I think all of that is what, to me, like, he's now kind of ready to be this superhero, and that's kind of like for me that's the real heart of this story, is watching Shang-Chi finally learn to love himself.
Well, we have a time for a few questions from our audience. So one of my student producers for Scriptfree is going to join us, Aileen. Hello, Aileen.
Hi, Aileen.
Hi. So Shang-Chi is a great film, so we've got a lot of great questions, but we only have time for a few, unfortunately. Our first question is from Aubrey, who asks, what did you take away from the production of Short Term 12 that you brought to a big Marvel blockbuster like Shang-Chi in terms of writing?
Short Term 12 there's actually weirdly a lot of similarities. Short Term 12 is a movie about characters who are dealing with the pain of their past, who are learning how to find some type of healing. Their healing in that movie is in a lot of ways similar to Shang-Chi's, because it's rooted in community, it's rooted in relationship, and so yeah, there's a lot of thematic connections between the two. Short Term 12 taught me, really at the core, it taught me the power of simple human emotions on screen. The power of a scene that on the page may not read as exciting enough, and those were some of the self-doubts I had before shooting Short Term 12. I was just like, this is just two people talking in one room, then there's two people talking in another room, now there's two people talking in another room. It's just a lot of talking. But it taught me really that, like, with the right actors communicating emotions that anyone can relate to, it can be extremely engaging, even though it's seemingly very simple.
We've got another question, an anonymous question that asks, part of the film was made during a time when Asian communities around the world, especially here in America, were facing a disproportionate amount of discrimination due to misinformation about the pandemic. Did these stories or conversations about this issue impact or affect the making of the film in any way?
I mean, those stories, I mean, if you're of Asian American descent, you are always affected by those stories, and a lot of them were really coming out while we were shooting. Really, to me it was an encouragement to all of us that we are telling the right story at this moment, and it didn't feel like it was part of our jobs to, like, make our movie more political or to try to tell a big moral point. I think the power of our movie is telling a story that is relatable to anybody. So, but by the end of it, it's surprising to somebody that they were able to spend time with all these Asian faces and actually relate to all of the things that they're going through. And I hope the subconscious byproduct of that is when they see an old man or woman on a street who owns the Chinese restaurant or convenience store around the corner, that they will see them differently. They will see them not as a one-dimensional stereotype, but they'll see them as a mom or a grandma, or that's like Shang-Chi's mom, and I like Shang-Chi, and so those types of things are, I hope, are a contribution to society in some way.
Yeah, okay. So we have one question we like to ask all of our guests for script to screen, the big finale. As we are an academic institution, we would like you to pretend you're a professor for a moment. If you were to assign one movie for students or any aspiring screenwriters to watch for studying screenwriting, which would it be?
I actually just recently, I've been watching a lot of Pixar movies with my son, because I now have a 4-year-old, and there's something. I mean, I loved Inside Out the first time I watched it, and I watched it again, and I loved it even more. It's pretty extraordinary how many levels are working simultaneously in that movie, because you're dealing with the emotions in a character's head, and you're falling in love with those characters, but you're simultaneously contributing those emotions to the the character of the little girl as well. There's so many things that that are working on that, in that script, that I think it would be pretty fascinating to just analyze and understand how those emotions are playing together, and how they can communicate like so clearly to a 4-year-old, but also be intellectually and philosophically engaging enough for an adult mind to really enjoy. I think it'd be pretty interesting to study.
Well, we're so glad we got a chance to talk about this wonderful film. And of course, in next year is the 10th anniversary for Short Term 12, so we'd love to bring you up to our theater and do it live in person.
That'd be fun. We should get some of the actors to come too.
Well, definitely. That'd be wonderful. It's such a well, thank you so much for joining us, and the audience for joining us today.